Trump sends U.S. destroyer to aid Maduro's cartel regime, the move no one saw coming. Imagine waking up one morning to the shocking news that a U.S. Navy destroyer is not sailing to confront enemies, not sent to protect allies, but instead heading into stormy waters where Venezuela's embattled Nicolás Maduro and his shadowy cartel connections still hold power. Imagine the global confusion, the anger, the disbelief as whispers spread. Could Donald Trump, the man known for his bold America First stance, be entangled in a move that looks like support for one of the most controversial regimes in Latin America? Viewers across the world are stunned. People are asking questions, and no one seems to have the full truth. This is the story that no one saw coming, the headline that has forced everyone to stop scrolling and pay attention. When Donald Trump held office, he was never shy about making dramatic, unpredictable decisions. Whether it was walking into North Korea to meet Kim Jong-un face-to-face, pressuring NATO allies, or redrawing long-standing U.S. policies in the Middle East, Trump was always a disruptor. But what if his boldness now, even out of office, echoes through U.S. military maneuvers don't align with the image he once built? What if the decision to send a destroyer into Venezuelan waters, into the very heart of what many describe as cartel-controlled territory, isn't about defending freedom or confronting tyranny, but instead looks like protection for Maduro's regime, the very figure he once denounced? That twist, that contradiction, is what has people scratching their heads. The United States and Venezuela have a complicated history. For decades, Washington has clashed with Caracas over oil, socialism, and regional influence. Under Hugo Chavez and later Nicolás Maduro, Venezuela became a fortress of anti-American rhetoric, a safe haven for alliances with Russia, China, and even Iran. At the same time, the U.S. has accused Maduro's circle of being deeply entangled with narco cartels, using drug trafficking as a lifeline to fund his regime's survival. This narrative made Trump during his presidency a fierce critic of Maduro, labeling him a dictator and even floating the idea of regime change. So when word spreads that a U.S. destroyer has been deployed in waters close to Venezuelan territory under circumstances that appear to benefit Maduro's grip on power, the world is left asking, is this a betrayal of past rhetoric, a chess move no one understands, or the most shocking turn of all, quiet collaboration with a cartel-linked regime? Think about the symbolism here. On one side of the ocean stands Donald Trump, the man who told Americans he would drain the swamp, that he would never back down from global corruption, that he would expose cartels and criminals. On the other side of that stormy ocean stands Nicolás Maduro, accused of being one of the most corrupt leaders in the Western Hemisphere, a man whose name has been tied to drug operations and shadow networks. And now, in between them, a U.S. Navy destroyer, one of the most powerful warships on Earth. But instead of confrontation, instead of pressure, instead of a blockade or show of force to break the regime's stranglehold, the optics suggest the opposite: protection, cover, and an unspoken alliance. Can you imagine the outrage if that is true? Can you imagine the betrayal people would feel? The headlines practically write themselves. Trump sends destroyer to shield Maduro's cartel empire. America First becomes cartel first? What game is being played in Venezuela? The mainstream media would explode with theories. Political rivals would seize on it to tear down Trump's legacy. Supporters would struggle to explain, spinning the narrative as a hidden genius move. Yet underneath all of that noise, the average person watching from their screen is left with one burning question: what is really happening here? This is where curiosity takes over, because no matter how you feel about Trump, love him or hate him, you cannot deny the weight of the moment. A U.S. destroyer is not a toy. It is not a prop. It is a floating fortress, bristling with missiles, radar systems, and the power to dominate any stretch of ocean it enters. The decision to deploy such a vessel is never casual. It is strategic, intentional, and loaded with meaning. If it is placed near Venezuelan waters, the world reads it as a message. But the message this time is blurry, confusing, and downright shocking. Is it a warning to Maduro's enemies not to strike? Is it leverage in backroom negotiations? Or is it something darker, the subtle shielding of a man accused of running a state-sponsored cartel operation? You see, stories like this grip people because they mix geopolitics with human drama. They expose the contradictions of power. Trump, the man who vowed to crush cartels, now appears to be standing on the same side as a cartel-linked regime. Maduro, the dictator painted as a villain by U.S. officials, now seems to be indirectly benefiting from America's most fearsome warships. It is almost cinematic, a political thriller unfolding in real life. Storm clouds over the Caribbean, lightning splitting the sky, and in the distance, the eyes of millions watching, wondering, who is really winning here? But let us go deeper. Why would anyone in Washington, much less someone tied to Trump, ever allow such optics to unfold? One explanation is oil. Venezuela holds some of the largest proven oil reserves in the world. Control of those reserves is not just about energy, it is about leverage in global markets. It is about power in negotiations with OPEC, and it is about influence over rising economies like China and India who crave Venezuelan crude. If protecting Maduro, even indirectly, ensures stability in oil flows or strengthens bargaining power, perhaps the destroyer's mission is not about loyalty to a regime, but about cold, hard economics. Still, how do you explain that to Americans who watch Trump brand himself as the enemy of socialism and cartels? How do you explain that without sounding like you traded principles for profits? Another explanation could be even more shadowy. Intelligence games. What if the destroyer's presence is not to aid Maduro, but to monitor him? What if the optics are misleading and the real mission is espionage, surveillance, and preparation for something bigger? It would not be the first time that superpowers played games in Latin America, using military power not to fight, but to position themselves for influence. Yet the danger is this: perception becomes reality. No matter the true mission, the world sees the U.S. Navy standing in waters where cartels and dictators thrive, and perception alone can destroy reputations. This is why people are glued to this story. This is why social media is exploding with theories, because deep down, everyone senses that something historic is unfolding. For decades, the United States portrayed itself as the bulwark against tyranny and corruption in the Americas. Yet here we are, faced with the image of Trump's shadow looming over a destroyer sailing toward waters that symbolize the very corruption America claimed to fight. If this is not betrayal, it is at least a crack in the armor, a signal that the rules are shifting. And the ripple effects? They are massive. Across Latin America, leaders are watching closely. Countries like Colombia, already battling their own cartel networks, are wondering if U.S. priorities have shifted. Allies in Europe, who once followed Washington's lead in sanctioning Venezuela, now wonder if they were played. Russia and China, longtime backers of Maduro, might be quietly celebrating, interpreting the destroyer's presence as proof that even Trump cannot resist engaging with their ally. The global chessboard is rearranging itself right before our eyes. Now pause for a moment and imagine the ordinary Venezuelan watching this unfold. A mother standing in line for bread, a worker struggling under hyperinflation, a family grieving after violence linked to cartels. What to think when they hear that a U.S. destroyer has arrived, not to liberate, not to challenge, but to seemingly protect the regime responsible for their suffering? The heartbreak, the confusion, the betrayal, it is unimaginable. And yet, this is the reality they may be forced to face. But here's where it gets even more dramatic. Because into this storm steps Africa. Yes, Africa. Across the ocean, leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso are rising with a new defiance, challenging Western dominance, confronting corruption, and rallying their people with the promise of sovereignty. The contrast could not be sharper. While one world power is accused of shielding a cartel-linked dictator, another corner of the globe is witnessing a surge of leaders who say, "We will not bow, we will not serve, we will rise." The golden light of Africa's awakening against the stormy backdrop of Venezuela's shadowy waters creates a global drama that feels like history itself is shifting. This is why people cannot look away. This is why headlines are screaming. And this is why you, listening right now, must pay attention. Because whether you love Trump or despise him, whether you support U.S. power or question it, this move is not just about one destroyer, one dictator, or one regime. It is about the future of how nations wield power, how truth is bent, and how perception shapes reality. Now I ask you directly, What do you think is happening here? Is this a brilliant chess move we cannot yet understand? Or is it a betrayal of principles hidden behind stormy seas? Is Trump playing a game of strategy with Maduro, or has he crossed a line that should never be crossed? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this video widely because the world needs to be asking these questions. Do not scroll past this story. Do not ignore the signs. Because when a U.S. destroyer sails into cartel waters under a cloud of suspicion, history is being written before our very eyes. If you found yourself gripped by this story, if you feel the same shock and curiosity, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications. This is not the last twist. More is coming, and you will want to be here when it happens. Stay alert, stay curious, because the storm is only beginning.